Benvinguts a la Catalan Week, organitzada per la ANC Nederland. Welcome to the Catalan Week event organized by the External Assembly of the Netherlands. We are going to have today an event focused on the language diversity as a cornerstone of Europe identity. This is organized by an external assembly that are the assemblies that are all over the world in order to represent the Catalan National Assembly. And we do that in the Catalan Week. That is a week that of events during the year, where the external assemblies have the opportunity to bring you topics of why the Catalan requires the independence. Then today's events, why we selected the language diversity, it's because at least for us, the Catalan language is very important, and it represents already the 2% of the European population speaking that language. It's more, if you can compare it, more than what the Danish, Finnish, Lithuanian, and other small countries' languages are represented in Europe. But in spite of this being more than speakers than other country languages, Catalan is not yet official in the UE. And also, it doesn't matter if we have a Spanish more liberal or more conservative, they're always putting repression into the Catalan language. With that, today we are having 3 guests and a moderator that are going to be bringing into the table some topics of why we think protecting these minority languages is important for the diversity of Europe. We have Isona Passola, that is going to be representing the Catalan language, Cornestone, that is going to be representing the French language, and Michel Neumuller, that is going to be representing the Occitan language. And we have invited Eva Daussat, that is going to be managing the discussion between all of them. Thank you, Eva. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Nuria. So first I would like to introduce the guests, and I'm going to do it by turn. So our first guest is Isona Passola, and she is a film producer, screenwriter, and director, and she makes movies in Catalan. She also was the first woman president of the Catalan Cinema Academy in the 160 years of the existence of that institution, and she remained for 8 years the president, but she's not anymore. In 2011, she produced the movie that had a lot of impact, Pa Negra, Black Bread, which won 9 Goya prizes, and Goya prizes are the Spanish Oscars, and 13 Gaudí prizes, which in turn are the Catalan Oscars, and was also nominated as foreign film for the Oscars. More recently, in 2017, she produced Incerta Gloria, and both Pa Negra and Incerta Gloria were directed by the Mallorcan director Agustí Villaronga. She's also produced and directed social and political documentaries such as Catalunya, España in 2009 or L'endemà, The Day After in 2014, both supporting the Catalan referendum for self-determination. In addition, she is a historian by training, and she holds a degree by the University of Barcelona that presumably comes handy in treating historical and social themes with the rigor and depth that characterize all her productions. She also lectures at the University Ramon Llull, so she is a colleague. So welcome, Isona. It's a true pleasure to have you with us today. Thank you for participating.
Hello, and thank you for inviting me. I'm very happy to be here with you, and I will try to do my best.
So let me start then with a general question, if you may. So just to warm up, what is your main motivation to produce audiovisual products in a minority language such as Catalan?
For me, it's not a minority language. For me, it's my language. So I have no problem. It's my language. I produce films with my language, and it's all. And fortunately, it's a language spoken for Now there are 13 million people, and I have no problem to go around the world with Catalan. For me, it's normal. Maybe I have more problems to go around Spain than to go around the world. So I'm happy with this language. I think that it's very necessary to produce and to use in the culture the language, even if it's not a very, very, very important language. It's wonderful for to be everybody richer and happy and diverse. And for me, it's not interesting to present the diversity as a problem. As an opportunity, okay. The diversity is a nice opportunity to be more generous, to have respect with the others, and it's good for the human people.
Wonderful. What a wonderful expression of normalizing the question instead of problematizing it. That's so. Yeah, just as an appetizer, before we dig further into everything that you said, let's just go to the next guest, Michel Neumuller. Hi, Michel. Michel Neumuller has a long trajectory as a journalist and is currently the editor-in-chief of the journal Aquò, which is published monthly since 2003 in a bilingual form, French and Languedoc, Provençal, and includes news as well as journal articles, interviews, and surveys relating to the language, but also not restricted to the topic of the language. So it has sections on politics, on society, or on environment, on education and culture, art, etc. Right? So maybe it's this variety that explains that the publication has seen its subscription increase by 7% in the last year, which also tells about the increasing popularity of the Languedoc. And Michel will tell us more about that. Michel is also highly involved in the Agricultural Association, l'Agriculteur Provençal, from the group Les Paysans du Midi. And he specializes on the issues of environment, land policies, he publishes in a variety of journals such as La Marseillaise, Sud Infos, Accent, and so forth, where he writes both in French and in Provençal. So to you too, Michel, welcome. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And let me also start with a quick question for you as a means of introduction, which would be the following. So what do you think the impact of using Provençal next to French in a journal like Aquò has been in the community, on your readers?
Alors, adesasem tutti, la prima causa è che vorrei saper se potesse me veire, perché per io l'escran è negro. Podi pas vous veire, solamente vous entendre. Est-ce que la caméra fonctionne per vous avoir?
We can see. We can see you fine.
Ok. La TOC d'Akodaki, mon journal depuis 2013, è de prepausar au mundo, a nostri leggeri, a nostri abbonati, subscriptori, de contenuti informativi d'actualità mai che una varietà de lucitan, come lo provençal, lo lengaducian o de coqueia lo gascon. E lo mondo che nous legis, il y a beleu de 2 semaines. Une sont les gens que podem ben legir e scrivere la lingua, e è una part del mondo che studio mai che raro, e che sono contenti di trovare dei contenuti cresi di qualità sull'attualità française, occitane, mondiale, e per esempio des reportages fuori di frontiera. E poi il y a une bonne part cresi dei nostri leggeri che in verità podrien pas écrire la langue, mais qui sont contents de trouver sont heureux de trouver un journal qui posque li dire que hanno un'identità sonora, un'identità d'escrire, e per aquel mondo, a quelle part dei nostri leggeri, aquò d'aquí è une brigue comme une bandiera. Podem brandir une bandiera occitane, mais che dice che son identità passa per une langue, che le véhicule de la langue è aquel giornale per elli. Per aquel mondo, il y a une fonction d'aquò d'aquí che è forse importante, è une fonction pédagogique. Vale a dire che aquel mondo hanno d'articoli in occitan che donano també un glossario di molti di parole mai difficili, o les meno correnti in occitan, hanno la possibilità di recuperare questa lingua. Sono dei mondi che voudriano parlare occitan, che voudriano scrivere occitan o lo leggere, ma che possono avere per aquò dei problemi d'impatto. E aquò d'aquí è un po' per elli come un corso mai aggradio che un corso, vale a dire che possono si interessare tutto d'un co, alla lingua siena e all'attualità del mondo. D'aquí. Just to Joachim?
Okay, I see. So
Okay.
in a sense, is the same that Isona was saying, that people feel represented by the language. That's very beautiful. But this also this pedagogical mission of the journal ties very well with our third guest of today that I'm going to introduce now, Cor van der Meer. He is a sociologist by training. He got his degree at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands. And he is an expert in the fields of multilingualism and the management of regional and minority languages, with special focus on education, right? Cor currently leads the Mercator European Research Center on Multilingualism and Language Learning, which is an NGO dedicated to promoting the linguistic diversity of Europe. The Mercator is hosted by the Frisk Academy, the Frisian Academy, which is the main institution for Frisian language and culture studies. The Mercator is an independent center and as a reference point for policymakers and professionals within the fields of multilingual education. And as the webpage of the center states, the Mercator European Research Center brings Europe to Friesland and Friesland to Europe, which I think is a lovely way to capture its mission. So Cor, welcome, and thank you for joining us today. And again, my first question perhaps ties with this statement of the Mercator page and continues nicely from what Michel was saying, and it has to do with the relationship between languages in Europe. So Cor, here we are. How can a minority language that is only read and written by 15% of their speakers, and I'm talking about Frisian, of course, how can such minority language compete with another one, Dutch in this case, which everybody in the country reads and writes well, or even with a language like English, which is also used by a high percentage of the population? That, of course, thinking in terms of languages competing with each other, if you could tell us to what extent they do, languages compete with each other, or should we look at it differently? And what is going for Frisian in this setting? Cor?
Well, thanks a lot, Eva, for this nice and kind introduction. It's a very good question. I was thinking about it in the way that, for me at least, the minority language, as I'm allowed to call Frisian, at least we have about 350,000 speakers. So it's not that much, not as much as Catalan language, but it's approximately the half of the population here in this province who can speak the language. I don't know if we could say that they are competing with each other, but I think that many people in Friesland feel the minority language, the Frisian language in this case, is, let's say, the language of the heart. And in that sense, we also speak the language of the country, in this case Dutch. But we also have the nation, of course. And then we also have the international language, where we can make each other understandable, like we are doing now. So for me, these three can exist next to each other. And of course, it is also in the classroom, for example, education system. It's sometimes difficult to keep the three beside each other in a somewhere parallel learning system. And that is, that is very difficult sometimes, but I think there are possibilities. And if you look at this way, I think, and especially this part of the heart, because you used to use your own language, as Isona already said, it's my language. I don't know how many there are, right? So it's my language. I know how to explain myself best in this language. So that is what I mean with the language of the heart. And the other languages we are using for communication. So in the country, in the nation itself, or in internationally. And in that sense, I think they can exist next to each other. And I'm also happy to say that nowadays, with the last few language surveys, the percentage of people who claim to be able to write the Frisian language is much higher. And that, I think, only has to do with the social media. Because these people, and of course, social media lies very close to the heart. So even young people try to use their own language, the language of the heart. And even if they don't spell it correctly, they use it because it's their language of the heart, so to speak. So I think they can coexist.
Oh, beautiful, this thing of the language.
But I have a different idea about this, because in my city, in Barcelona, I think there are 300 languages of the heart. So what can we do with this? Because if we are speaking about the heart, we have not the solution for the cohesion, national cohesion, for having a language that it's the common language of this part of the world. In our case, now we have the discussion between Spanish and Catalan, because in my country, with a lot of immigration, we need almost one language of reference. Maybe if we decided that is Catalan, we have a very important part, 50% of the population that is not the heart language. And if they decide that it's Spanish language, the other 50%. So for me, it's very necessary to know what is the language for one community, because the heart is something very difficult, very difficult. If we start with the heart, it's very difficult to have a language for the cohesion of a society, you know. And this is a very interesting discussion that we have here, because if we have 300 languages of the heart, what happens in our society when we try to explain the collective things, to decide the collective things? We can do one thing, we can say, okay, let's go with the English, everybody with English. No. English is for going around the world and for having meetings with people. It's no. We must make a choice. And you can make a choice if you have an state that protect you, that help you. But in our case, the Spanish state is not in this position. The opposite, they have 500 million of people that speak Spanish around the world, and they have problems with 3 million or 10 million people speaking Catalan. This is a very strange thing for intelligent people, you know. Okay, that is the question. It's not a problem, it's a difficulty, but living is having difficulties always, all time, you know.
So that is the tension, isn't it, right? So on the one hand, people want to speak and to produce art and everything else with the language of their heart. And at the same time, we need to make it viable, yeah? We need to ensure that we are communicating and that there's this social cohesion, right? And the issue is who decides, right? Who decides which language can be both of the heart and of production, and which language isn't, right? In that sense, Isona, I suppose when you produce a film and you decide to do it in Catalan, yeah, instead of Spanish or so, are there extra costs that you incur by doing so with translations maybe that were not necessary in other languages, or any other logistics that make it more expensive to produce something with the language of your heart, which happens to be a small language?
No, it's not a question of the price. Sure, it's not this. Because we have protection. We have the cinema is protected in Europe. Every country has protection for producing, and we have a special protection for producing in Catalan. Of course, the easy way is to say, okay, I am going to produce in Spanish because I will have more audience. This is not true. Even when we produce in Spanish and we go to Latin America, in Chile, in Argentina, they put subtitles in the films because they don't understand the Spanish with the film is produced here. So in terms of outdoor cinema, no problem for producing. If you produce just the opposite, when you go to a festival with a language that is not English, maybe it's better because now it's very fashionable to produce Korea, you know, the local things. People love local things. If the local things are good, produce good films, people love it. It doesn't matter the language, because the language of the emotion you put in a drama or in a comedy is universal, you know. We have everybody the same kind of emotions. If you explain this in a language or in another language, we have a possibility, the translation. And now with the platforms and with this, everybody can, with a button, with palm, pushing a button, you can change, you can have subtitles. It's because this that Wim Wenders always says that the language of Europe is the translation. We don't have only one language like the American people. We have, fortunately, lots of languages. And because this is fantastic. We must translate it. I think that more and more people, even if it's in mass media, they are going able to read subtitles. It will be a normal thing, more and more, except in Spain, in France, and I think it's in Italy, that they dub the films. And they dub, because in these countries, without the films, because our dictatorships, Franco, Mussolini, and Hitler, decided that the foreign languages were rubbish. So they decided dubbing. And this is ridiculous, but it doesn't matter if it serves for having more possibility of traveling the films, it doesn't matter. But I believe that the solution is the subtitles, and most people I think that more and more they are able to read subtitles. It was not easy for old people, but for young people, no problem.
So I suppose that also goes for those 300 languages that you were talking about that we have in Catalonia, right? I mean, then everybody should just...
no, poor people, the people that speak 300 languages are the poorest of our society. You know that we speak Catalan and Spanish, more or less 50%. And the third language is Amazic. How do you translate Amazic? Amazic. You know what is Amazic? The language of the nomads of the desert. This is the language that is more spoken in Catalonia now because the immigration of the south. They have no possibility to be heard with this language. And we have the problem of our language. For me, Amazic spoken in Catalonia is a very interesting thing and I love it. But they are the poor people in the society. They have is an oral language, but it's the third. So it's third, fourth is Arabic. There are the languages of the immigration, but this is the same in the whole Europe. And in America, I don't know, but you have this in London, it's full of languages, the world. But every country has their own language, you know, for everybody can understanding each other. We need almost one for everybody, the language of one country, and we respect every language that is spoken in a country. In my country, I love the other languages, but I need one because I can speak 300 languages. I would like it, but it's impossible, you know.
I would like to bring Michel back into the discussion. I know that he's having a bit of technical problems, but in this richness that Isona was mentioning, I think that you have opted for promoting and encouraging the learning of at least two of the local languages, Provençal and French. How do you think this can be done, including also the social media platforms and so forth? How does your journal help in the learning of Provençal in this case?
sorry, Nuria, but you want to repeat the question.
Okay.
I'm in the problems.
Yes. So the question is basically, how can we encourage people to use minority languages in the new platforms? Since your journal is mainly an electronic journal, yeah? And how do you think we can encourage people to get engaged with minority languages to the point that there's more presence in the internet of these languages?
Amli médias nouveaux des communications, donc les plateformes come dies, les causes se sono acclarite perché fin che anche un moment, vale a dire fin qu'ils en a de 1994-95, avant de l'Internet, le monde ne savait pas que parlava occitan. Perché per une raison force simple, dégaine la nécessité de parler occitan. Et donc, le monde, dans une carrière, dans une bar, ne savait pas, dans une ACA, tout le monde parle français. Et donc, mais ce n'est pas possible, sans se connaître une personne, de savoir si parle l'occitan. Mais savons que 20% de la population est incapacité de comprendre, et pas mal. À l'Internet, tout à coup, a changé. A changé parce que le monde pouvait écrire aussi par là, un groupe de WhatsApp, Facebook en particulier, Twitter. Era possible de connaître des mondes qui n'avaient jamais vu de visu et de s'exprimer et de s'échanger à mail en occitan. Et donc, si vous, l'apparition, comment dire, quand l'Internet est arrivé, la parole me manque, c'est comme une possibilité d'expandir la population, per chacun, era la possibilité d'expandir la population qui parlava la langue. Et donc, avait trouvé d'un coup, enfin non d'un coup, à Chapao, avait trouvé un maillot vertadier des centaines ou des milliers de personnes en capacité de lire ou d'entendre ce que nous autres pouvions dire en occitan. Et en mai d'accord, en mai d'aquella possibilité, era l'opportunité de voir arriver des mondes qui avaient envie de la langue, qui avaient envie de l'apprendre et de la parler, sans se pouvoir faire. Et donc, si on passe de la desconnaissance d'une population qui pouvait parler à une connaissance mai profonde et mai large d'une population qui ne pouvait pas imaginer que serait possible de converser à mail. Et donc, la possibilité pour mon journal de s'adresser à quel monde s'est trouvée d'un coup élargie. La Kodaki à web est pour récent, date de 2020, pardon, 2020. Et donc, avec 12-13 ans, pas mal. Ce que peut dire est que chacun, il y a à l'Urodar, à Peraki, 5000 personnes qui viennent pour lire à quel journal. Ça ne savons pas si nous légisons, parce qu'il n'y a que des mourants 10 secondes et d'autres 26 minutes. 26 minutes sur un site web est monumental. Et il y a des causes qui nous semblent extravagantes, estrambotiques. Sont, par exemple, les japonais, avec une lecture japonaise. Ne savons pas pourquoi. Parce que connaissons deux personnes et pas mal en capacité de lire l'occitan au Japon. Pas mal. Beleu que sont des mondes de la piccione communauté catalane du Japon qui peuvent lire, beleu pas entendre, mais lire l'occitan. Beleu que sunt de japonès que sabem que aquel mundo sunt curios, podem s'afugar per des causes que comprendríem pas nosaltres. Mais coexiste. E hi ha a l'Eurodar a per aquí 240 japonès que venen en mitjan llegir durant 26 minutes a Kodaki. Comprenem pas. És una causa que comprenem pas, és el misteri ligat a l'internet. Ce que puc dir és que a l'Eurodar havem una activitat força important sur le milieu social. Sur le milieu social, valent a dir, mais en particulier le Twitter, Facebook, Instagram també, a més de monde que coneixem pas. Coneixem pas, mais que són quand même veig de discutir d'aquella actualitat, sobretot aquest any, en 2020-2021, perquè nostra actualitat en particulier sur le thème de l'apprentissage de la langue, de l'enseignement de la langue, est devenu une cause nationale en France. N'avions pas imaginé fincar qu'il y aurait tant de monde afugar, intéressat per l'enseignement de l'occitan, ou du breton, ou du corse, ou de l'alsacien, du catalan et de l'euskara. C'est une cause qui est apparue en 2019-2020 et qui change force la situation de notre langue en France. Ça y passe, ça y bien répondu à ta question.
You actually were very suggestive, right? And then, I mean, by listening to you three, right? So this is what I get, right? So Core is saying, okay, there are languages of the heart, and because we have different hearts, hence the diversity, the linguistic diversity that we have in Europe. There are many hearts, yeah. And then Isona is saying it is not an economic problem as much, because we have translation. So in fact, everybody could actually speak the language of their heart. There's a little bit of a political problem with keeping the unity, the cohesion of the society. And then Michel, you're saying, look, and then when you do it, people actually respond in surprising ways, even from Japan and so forth, right? But then why do we get these reports that the linguistic diversity is decreasing actually in Europe? It's not increasing. It's not increasing in spite of people feeling more free to express their heart and having more platforms to express their heart. It's not increasing in spite of technology helping with translations and so forth, subtitles and all these things. And it's not increasing in spite of initiatives that are very valuable, that locally seem to have an impact, and even beyond locally, right? So what is the problem? Why are we losing this diversity and not increasing this diversity? Maybe Core, maybe you have some insight into this?
One more time, hai una difficultat amb la... Perdona.
So my question is, what are the challenges that the linguistic diversity is?
I think I understand. All right. It's very difficult for me to è forse difficile per io di rispondere a quella questione, perché avem pas l'oubli de comprendre l'intégrité de la société européenne. È ben difficile di sapere perché un danès o un catalan un habitant du sud de l'Italie ne serait pas intéressé par sa propre diversité et lui agradarait plus d'aller vers l'autre, mais l'outil commun qu'est l'anglais. est-ce que quelqu'un crezi est difficile de comprendre, mais il me semble que l'apparition de l'internet, du moyen social, comment dire, ben que des populations différentes, di son enveja, di son désir, sont apparues et à costa d'aquelle population qui peut sembler large d'Européens qui voulaient surtout communiquer entre elles, que siège la langue. C'est-à-dire qu'utilisant en particulier et en premier la langue de l'Empire, l'anglais. Qui, à costa d'aquelle population, il y a d'autres qui ne pouvaient pas bien connaître, mais qui en vez de sécu d'escambiar d'idées, de tenir des contacts, mais à son identité propre, qui ne voulons pas l'amagar. Ça y passe, ça y bien répondu à ta question. Est-ce qu'on m'a
I think you're pointing out at something.
Après, c'est vos, per acabar, c'est qu'il y a sous Aquò une biaille politique. Les États, en général, les États d'Europe, au beleu du monde entier, n'ont pas envie de s'embarrasser avec des langues minoritaires, qui pour elles sont des patchs, comme des baragnes qui empatchent d'aller vers un monde global. Aquí. Alors, donc, avec tout, il crée des difficultés avec nos États. Il y a des États qui peuvent reconnaître une langue minoritaire. Bon, c'est le cas de l'Espagne, mais ils bien. Tout les problèmes quand les Catalans ou ailleurs les Basques peuvent se faire entendre. Donc, quand le droit de parler sa langue ou de l'exprimer ou de l'enseigner est inscrit dans une constitution, n'est-ce pas per Aquò que l'État voulait se le droit? En France, en particulier, c'est un cas différent parce qu'il y avait, au moment de la Révolution française, c'est-à-dire au moment que le français s'impose véritablement à tous, il y avait des raisons d'estrangeance. Un breton ne pouvait pas parler à un provençal. Un corse ne pouvait pas parler à une Alsacien. Tout aquel gens avaient rien de veille ensemble, c'est nous qui sommes du génère humain. Et est une toque, une volonté politique française, maillotment acceptée par le monde qui avait envie de partager une idée qui, à l'ourdar, pouvait encore dire comme liberté, égalité et fraternité, d'anar d'écoutria, de faire ensemble. Qui est une toque véritablement politique. Mais il y a quelle toque politique à l'ourdar, c'est vir d'esquine, c'est-à-dire qu'elle a une volonté d'uniformisation complète. Et la difficulté, en particulier en France, mais qui est também une difficulté dans tous les pays d'Europe, quand une grande diversité linguistique, comme est le cas de la France, les États veulent acabar avec quelle diversité. Per elles, la veillent comme un péril. Et donc, pour nous autres, une tension véritable entre une volonté affirmée, par exemple en France, de laisser la liberté à tout le monde. Donc, la liberté de parler et d'enseigner sa langue. Mais qui d'une autre côté serait un péril pour l'unité nationale. Donc, avec aquelle schizophrénie d'État qui voulait laisser la liberté et qui voulait mais que tout l'empatcha. J'espère que j'ai répondu à ta question, pardon, d'une biaille compréhensible.
Yes, I think you're pointing out to this tension that what Isona was saying, that people like local things and that they are authentic and they are very, very particular and they can be produced in the place where they are produced and nowhere else in the world. I think, Isona, that's what you meant before. But at the same time, people want this universality of communication that then therefore cannot be too local, right? Cor, I see that you say yes with the head. Do you? Can you see how does it look like?
I do agree, but I also think that one of the, if you want to call it dangers, perhaps for the small languages, is the enormous growth of mobility in general. I mean, people are crossing over not only countries but also international and to the States or wherever. That's an enormous growth of that. So that the demand for a communication language is very high, and that tends to be these days English as a looks like a starting point. But at the same time, of course, we have to keep up. In fact, if we want to keep the languages also with let's say the technological development, and we couldn't keep up the same pace as we are mobile these days. So a region, people were very much concentrated and working in regions before, and now you see even people from the eastern part of Europe traveling and working in the western part, or the other way around. I mean, all is possible, and they all need this communication language. And I'm sorry to say that very often the local language, the regional language, or minority languages, is suffering from this development. So I think that we need to put extra effort, because normally states don't offer that much infrastructure or means or finances available to keep up this. So it needs to have a good it needs to be addressed in, for example, education, but also adult courses, for example, when they start working in our regions. So that is of high importance, I think. And I hope in the future that technology will help us to overcome this discrepancy we have at this moment. That is something I just wanted to add in the discussion, mobility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the European Union actually has a general policy of protecting linguistic diversity, but then actually leaves the question to the individual states to actually decide how they want to promote it. A little bit what Isona was also saying, like, well, one state might do very well and another state will do badly, and they're both under well under the umbrella of what the European Union allows, right? So Cor, you are saying that we need more initiatives in education, yeah? How does it look, Isona? How does it look from the artistic point of view? What do you need, or what do you think is more needed so that there is more art, more presence of Catalan in your case, but other minority languages in art and media and all that?
With the art is easier than with business, because usually the artists respect a lot the identity of the each other, you know, and even in a society that protect arts, it's very curious when if it's a film, a book, or a song, there is not in any language, but not the language of the state in this case. But the art, the wall of the art is the wall of the art. And I work in an art that is now is more than an art. Now is the most important way of communication. Not only cinema, the whole of the visual. It's very important in the platforms, and it's the new way that people knows the culture and mass media. And so when you say that the language with media and with platforms, everybody learn English, and the babies and when they start speaking, they speak in English because they have seen the screen with cartoons, you know. So maybe I am sure that we will be able to speak lots of languages in the future because internet. There is a big opportunity. At the same time, is a problem for the languages, the little languages is a problem. But we have a channel. It's because this that maybe you have in Japan somebody is speaking Occitan, you know. The Catalan people, we are super connected in the world, even with our associations. If we are now, the Catalan speakers are, I don't know, in America, we can have meetings like this. We can speak, we can practice our language like this. So it's a problem, but it's an opportunity. I am very positive. I think that we must take the opportunities. And it's very different to speak. If I speak of the Catalan language, you speak about Occitan language, we are in a different reality. It's another world. Maybe Catalan, if the French Jacobinism, I don't know how to say this in English, but Spain is not a state so strong than France, and Catalan has resisted a lot. But Occitan, it was a language as important as Catalan. And the state was against this, and the state lost the opportunity of having another language, a very nice language, a very important language, cultural language. Okay, maybe if the things change, you can recuperate this. It's much more difficult than in Catalonia. But in Catalonia, the language is not cut. You say that in 1940 was cut. Here, no. It's here the continuity of the language. Even during the dictatorship, it was clear. And now with the democracy, we have the school for everybody in Catalan. But this not means that people speak Catalan the whole day. They speak Spanish, they speak lots of languages, but the language of the school is Catalan. You know, everybody understands, and in the social use, they don't speak the language. And the problem we have now in Catalonia is what is happening with the social use of Catalan. Because in the school, everybody knows. Everybody, even if it's a Chinese that have arrived 10 years ago, he can speak Catalan, he can understand Catalan. But the social use is now a problem. It's because internet, because now is very nice for young people, for instance, to sing in English, you know. And 20 years ago, it was Catalan. And 40 years ago, it was Spanish. It depends of the situation. And now, okay, my son and their friends, they sing in English. Sometimes they sing in Catalan, no? But it's fantastic for because they know very well English, and is the language of the communication, the global communication. So it's very important to have a state. Occitania has not a state, Catalonia has not a state, but Catalonia has an autonomy, and we could do more things that we are doing now, because they are absolutely afraid about the social use of the language on the street, in the patios of the school. They discover that it's very important to protect more and more. And I think that they are trying to attack this problem. Otherwise, the Catalan, I don't know if it can disappear. I am not sure, but it could be. It could be. It could be if the people don't want to speak the language, because here everybody speaks Spanish. I want to see this to Newmuller. Everybody understands Spanish, but we speak Catalan also. If we go to a bar, everybody understands Spanish, but there is a population, almost 2.5 million of population, that they say, we want to speak Catalan, we defend Catalan, and we are able to do anything for protecting our language. And when we have this population, it's not 2 million, 2.5 million, that they decided to defend their own language. We have a very important force, even if we have a state opposite to you, you know. And this is our case. This is our case because Franco was not able to make disappear our language. He tried it, but he couldn't.
I think it's very what you're saying, that the one size fits all does not exist as for solution for survival, right? So if I hear you correctly, the Catalans feel that the next step for their survival of their language is a state. That might not be the case for the Frisians or for the Provençals or for many others, right? So it's not that every language that is small is threatened in the same way, right? But it's actually interesting to see how the community thinks that the measures that are necessary are in each case, right? I don't know whether that would be the case for Frisian, that they need a state too in order to survive. Cor, do you think that they feel like that, the Frisians?
No, you have a state.
There are only a minor group of people who think that a state would be good, but the majority agrees with the situation as it is, and we are also quite a peaceful minority in that sense. So we see the advantages and the disadvantages quite clearly, and we are happy that we can talk with the national government and, of course, regulations like those of the Council of Europe, the Charter for Regional Minority Languages, for example. These help. And so it comes to the agenda every now and then. We talk about the issues we conquer and where we are struggling with. And we ask for support also from the national government. In many cases, we have an agreement about this. So, yeah, I think we're quite happy with the situation as it is, even though, of course, it could be better. Education could be better. We would have liked to have more infrastructure. So there are always a number of issues to be solved. But in general, yes, I think we are satisfied with the situation as it is, politically anyway. And of course, everybody can use more money. We would like to have those In some cases, we need more teaching materials, we need better skills, or more teachers and teacher training, and so on and so on. So there's a lot of things still to do, but we're there and try to maintain, even though it's difficult sometimes. Yeah.
So maybe to wrap up, because there are some questions for the audience already, but I would say that then do I represent you correctly if I say that yes, it's a matter of the heart, it's a matter of belonging on representation, and it's a matter of resources and economic support, but it is also a political issue. It's also something that needs to be managed from the political sphere. Is that so? Is that so also for Provençal, Michel? Could we say that the linguistic diversity should be managed in the same way that environmental diversity that you're an expert on? Is that a fair comparison? We need to manage the environment to make a livable space for everybody. Do we need to do the same with language? Is it fair to say that? And I ask you, Michel, because you are an expert in agricultural and environmental issues, yeah?
È una question... Grazie. È una questione delicata, ma podem se dire, nous autres, que la question du language, de la langue, est la méthode à quelle de la diversité de la nature ou de la biodiversité. Mais est un peu une vista de l'esprit. Le monde que podem pensar, imaginar notre mi-temps naturel exprimé avec notre culture et donc notre langue, perché en catalan, en occitan, o sabipa, en ligurian, beleu, il y a des causes pour exprimer la nature et la biodiversité qui ne pourraient pas se dire en anglais. Normal, perché la langue anglaise est bien adaptée à la biodiversité en Angleterre. Mais tout à coup, me semble, mai que tout, une sorte de viste de l'esprit, une biais de pensée intellectuelle, la cause. Parce qu'en vérité, nous escape. Le monde des incapacités de chiffrer la biodiversité, les incapacités de l'apparat, mais sans notre langue. À dire la vérité, l'anglais serait prou. Et donc, me semble une draille intellectuellement intéressante, mais en pratique qui ne pourrait pas correspondre au bien général de vivre la biodiversité à l'heure d'art. Crezi que nous fait est-ce qu'il y a des forces importantes pour le monde qui veut parler sa langue, d'exprimer sa nature, d'exprimer son pays et toutes les recantons, toute la diversité de son environnement dans sa langue. À quoi est-ce vrai? Et pouvons le vérifier chaque jour. Mais est-ce que Aquò peut être entendu, compris par le monde par toute une société? Ça ne vit pas. En vérité, ta question me pose un problème. Parce que crezi qu'il y a une différence entre ce que pouvons ressentir et le bien de vivre général de la société. Et qu'avec, par exemple, en France ou en Europe, une politique de défense de la biodiversité qui se passe complètement de l'occitan, à quel monde n'existe pas.
Per une raison force simple, est-ce que son travail, son emploi, sont des postes en général intéressants et c'est commençant de dire que si rien nécessite de s'intéresser à la langue du pays pour dire sa biodiversité, c'est une cause qui lui pose un problème parce que c'est une remise en question de son savoir et le monde qui belge l'environnement n'y agrade pas force de s'entendre dire quand des lacunes. Sinon, verrai, sont des causes que pourriez vérifier. Voulez dire l'intérêt de dire la biodiversité ou l'environnement ou le risque naturel dans une langue, si me semble évident. Per nous autres, voudriez dire une anecdote. Je suis journaliste spécialisé dans les questions d'environnement et des politiques territoriales, basiquement. Et donc, il y a eu toute une époque où on terre des colloques, des séminaires et des conférences sur le thème de l'environnement, en général en province. Et est en contact avec des bails qui pouvaient balayer un organisme d'environnement, une collectivité publique qui s'entrevave de l'environnement et tout à coup. À quel monde parlavons du risque naturel, comme les inondations ou les mouvements de terrain et tout à coup. Bon, il y a eu l'opportunité d'expléguer per elle une carte à l'escale de 25 000 ans. Une carte d'État major, comme disions nous autres. C'est-à-dire où il y a force indication des terrains, mais la toponymie du lieu. Et sur quelques centimètres carrés d'aquelle map, il peut dire en quel monde force chanu, qui avait un saber universitaire, qui est passé par des grandes écoles, il peut dire tous les risques qui pouvaient exister sur quelques centimètres carrés des maps. C'est-à-dire, les mouvements de terrain sont dits per nostri reire, per nostri vieilles, sont dits dans le terrain par exemple, le clapier. Le clapier, c'est-à-dire qu'il y a force peir qui peut donner boulega. Comment dire, est possible de dire la diversité des arbres, parce que sur la map est écrit l'urur, c'est compris en catalan, hein? Donc l'urur. Et per elle, ça ne vient pas qu'il y ait une bosse d'erreur sur la map. Et il y avait tout plein de caves comme par exemple l'oule. L'oule veut dire, là, en français, serait la marmite. Est une rivière qui boulegue force, mais d'une vieille force dangereuse, comme quand l'aigle est à rebouillir. À quel monde ne pouvait pas entendre à cause sur une map, mais qu'aucun qui parlait la langue occitane ou pouvait d'une simple gâche. Si on a un peu de toutes les costas, Eva. Et donc, ça y passe, il y a une grande cohérence dans tout ce qu'il dit. Mais pourriez résumer comme ça. De ségu, la connaissance de la langue du pays peut nous dire force cauve sur la biodiversité et tout un film de cauves sur l'environnement. Mais le monde qui bailège à quel domaine, per elle est une sorte de périls, de dangers, parce que c'est une connaissance campa. Une connaissance campa, per elle est un risque au niveau social. Beleu qui ne sont pas tant bons qu'à quoi.
So when we lose a language, we lose more than just the language. We lose all the wisdom and all the experience that is encoded in that language. Is that what you mean?
a pity.
Yeah. Well, I think since we are past the 1 hour mark and there are a couple of questions by the audience, I would like to go to those. And they don't say who they are asking, so I'm just going to read them. And I'm going to start with the second one, which is, would we be stronger if we would join efforts and fought together for the languages rather than independently? The Frisians with the Frisians, the Catalans with the Catalans, you know, the Occitans with the Occitans, whatever. Or are we too different for that, right? And before you answer, I mean, look at us, right? Because it's easy to talk about others, but here we are talking about linguistic diversity, and we have chosen English as the language of communication, and that has been a very difficult choice. It has not been a choice of the heart or a choice of, I mean, many factors have come up, right? But eventually you have to make a choice. So what can we do, little us? Should we unite in the fight? Should we succumb? Are we too different? If we had chosen another language, it's the only language that we had in common, so it would not have been possible to talk to each other. How do we solve that conundrum? Who wants to take it up? Should we unite all the little ones in the world? Cor, please.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I understand the question in the same way. I think that what perhaps was meant also that we join forces in the sense that we in Europe, for example, try to work together more closely for the sake of minority languages in general. And I was happy with the question because I think also thanks to the European Union, the minorities also found each other more easily than before. So in a way, we found each other. We are working together, actually. There are strong differences, of course. Only the size already. I mean, we have spoken about your language, the Catalan language, of 7 million speakers, more than some countries have. And the Frisians with the 350,000 speakers. So the enormous differences, but the challenges we face are very often the same. And so we can help each other. We can learn from each other, especially. And we have big brothers and smaller brothers, so to speak, but and really endangered language. I think they can also profit from the work of the others and the bigger languages, so to speak, the bigger minority languages. So in that sense, I think also thanks to the support system of the European Union, we are surviving, and we at least can find each other in many cases. Also for the languages, for the sake of languages. So yeah, I'm happy for that. I don't think I would support also the strong be in favor, so to speak, for working together even more, perhaps. As we already we have a certain level, but it can be improved, perhaps. But I'm happy with the language with this question, and I'm happy to say that, to my opinion, we work quite well together. We know where to find each other, and we know each other's expertise. So we exchange good practices, as it's called these days, and we exchange experience and so on. So that is we can learn and from each other. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even if we do it in English, right? Even if we take English, then we work together in English, but then we are working for the same thing. And Michel, you had something to add, I think you have the...
Arthur Zenkaraki. Arthur, posso traduire? Come se nous citant, c'est Arthur, il n'y arrive pas de traduire, ou c'est adégu senana, a Sajarai en catalan, d'accord? En 2019, les differenti comunità linguistiche in France, che sono per aquí 7 grandes, hanno assaggiato di séjourner, di fare une action commune per gagner le droit per affortir le droit de faire enseigner ces langues. Et il n'est pas évident de mettre des bretons à mes d'occitans à mes des corses à mes d'alsaciens à mes des catalans et des basques. perché le cause sono forse differenti entre les Corses, les Catalans et les Occitans qui ont une langue romane, qui est plus ou moins proche du français. C'est possible de se comprendre. Et le breton ou l'euskara, qui sont complètement différents, sont d'un domaine totalement différent, n'era pas évident parce que les préoccupations n'étaient pas les mêmes. Arthur est en train de traduire. Donc, avem creat, entre tutti, perché davant le blocage de l'État, qui est fort, comme jamais s'était fort, avem décidé d'anar de cotrilla, de faire d'un biais enseigne. Et avem créé en novembre de 2019 une entité qui disons en français pour que vivent nos langues, perché vivent nostre langue. Et aquel a commencé à faire d'actions communes sur tout le territoire français à des dates communes também, comme par exemple le 20 d'octobre de 2020, où on était devant toutes les préfectures, donc la représentation du gouvernement, devant toutes les rectorats, c'est-à-dire la représentation du ministère de l'enseignement dans chaque région, dans tout un moulin de bâtiments publics. Il y a eu des manifestations d'accueil pitchung avec 10 ou 20 personnes parce qu'il y a encore une situation de restriction rapport à la pandémie. Mais il y a eu comme 200 à 250 manifestations au même moment. Et la presse n'en a parlé d'un partout. Sous Aquò, est arriba la discussion, serait force l'une d'expliquer, mais avait eu une députée bretonne force intéressante, Paul Molac, qui a pu caminar dans la jungle de la législature française pour faire per arribar a prépausar un projet de lei sur l'enseignement de langues minoritaires, ce qui n'era pas possible auparavant. N'era pas possible per un député de faire. Era solament le gouvernement qui le pouvait faire. Et amb une possibilité pitchona dans la législation, a pu va faire. Et ça s'est trouvé amb un monde que le premier ministre français, Jean Castex, un catalan, a pu faire étudier per ses services, en vis qu'il y avait a per aquí, en France, almenys 200.000 familles concernées per l'enseignement de langues minoritaires. Et Aquò era une surprise per le gouvernement français. 200.000 familles veut dire beleu 500.000 personnes qui peuvent voter. Et Aquò, dans une situation politique en France, où chaque personne à l'élection présidentielle de 2022 comptera, est une force qui mettait le monde qui est en train de boulegar, de mourir per si langue, n'avait pas conscience. Mais à resfa, le monde a laquelle conscience qui peut en tout cas la presse locale, qui peut en tout cas les élites locales, et que aqueles élites locaux peuvent voter pour des sénateurs. Et justement, c'est pour le Sénat français qu'est arrivée la lei Molac. Alors, je ne ferai pas l'histoire de la lei Molac parce que c'est fort complexe, mais elle a apparu une cause qui ne savait pas, est-ce qu'entre toutes aquelles gens tant différents comme les Bretons et les Corses, mais qui avaient la même préoccupation, era possible de faire un mouvement politiquement distingué. D'accord? Era possible pour le monde politique de nous déstrier. Et Aquò era une nouveauté fondamentale en France. Per Aquò, faire des cotrilles, donc faire conjunts, est une cause qui est très importante. Nous est apparu en 2020-2021 comme fondamentale. Grand merci.
Yeah, so not only we should, but we have, and it's been good. That is the message a little bit, right?
But you know, the European community, more and more, the people is fighting for the languages. I know this very well because Catalan with people of different communities with problem with the languages, they work together in a strong way. And the question of the languages, if they say that very often is on the table. So it's a good place for making force together, because it's the place when the different communities work for the problems of the communities. So I know, because I know very well people that have been working there, they say it's incredible the times of the subject of the items of the languages, the minority languages, are on the table in the sessions. So we have an opportunity to fight together for our languages in Europe. Yeah, and it's much more easy because we need places of power. We need places of power for working for our languages. And this is a place of power. If we don't have enough people for fighting, maybe it's your case for the Occitan. You have the Eurodeputies, and not in Occitania, maybe Catalan can fight for you, because we know very well our pain for our language, you know, and this is solidarity, and this is wonderful. Try to speak with the people that is in Europe, to make proposals to them, and to ask them for the solidarity of the other countries with the same problems. It's a good way, I'm sure.
Well, so I can't imagine a better way to end this discussion than with this hopeful, note. And I think you're very right. People are doing things, and I think the visibility that you are giving them in your different, from your different points, be it the artistic, the cinema, be it in journalism, be it more academically, if you want. I think it's from all fronts, it's important that they all unite to give them visibility and support. And I think we are unfortunately out of time. So I want to thank everybody for your insight. And I would like to give the floor back to Nuria, who is going to close the discussion, I think. Nuria?
Thank you, Eva. Yeah, and I want to take also this opportunity to thank Cor, Michel, and Isona for spending a little bit of time with us. I hope that your message, your wisdom and experience has arrived to our public. And we hope that the public has enjoyed this session. Thank you for listening to us. You will be able to share this YouTube recording later on with your family, friends, and whoever you want to share it. We are ending the Catalan Week event from the Netherlands today. Thank you all. Have a nice evening and see you soon. Probably maybe tomorrow in the next events of the Catalan Week. Thank you. Moltes gràcies a tothom.
Good luck.
Thank you. Gracias.
Yeah.